exist in. And then the other question about the non-Title I schools whose performance is not at an adequate level. I may ask Ben to speak briefly to the RAD legislation that talked about an expectation to target our lowest performing schools, but only if additional state dollars existed.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why I'm excited for this opportunity that the ESC waiver affords us is, and I imagine people have different opinions about this, but my opinion would be that our accountability discussions have been almost entirely federally driven, and that we have struggled as a state to develop a state model of accountability and a state model of assistance that isn't reliant upon federal definitions of whether a school is title eligible or not. Indeed, if all kids are valuable and all schools are valuable and the state sets the academic goals, it really shouldn't matter whether a school is title eligible or not in terms of our responsibility to provide them the assistance they need to get to college and career ready. So my hope is that we effectively take the next step of the original RAD process and we say, no, we need to go beyond just creating a mechanism for identifying struggling schools. We need to take the next step and identify a mechanism for providing the supports that not only RAD schools need, but also other schools that are struggling that may not fall to the bottom of the RAD list. Are we at a point of
one more quick follow-up, and I can tackle this one. The question is, how can the state accountability system take the formative assessment, if it exists, into account to measure growth? So I think what Andy was speaking to is a system of taking both state-mandated testing and local decision-making and coming up with a robust assessment system at the district level that will really inform, at a classroom level, inform instruction. You know, we will certainly be exploring ways of including different kinds of assessment data, but there are a lot of challenges when districts have different kinds of formative data and different, most of that data isn't frankly reported to the state. So we have some challenges there. We will explore those issues, but we definitely, as much as we appreciate and value the index, it isn't the only kind of assessment that's out there. So districts have a lot of value added in terms of their local choices to use assessments in various ways.
And we have another set of slides, and also there will be another opportunity to pose questions as we go. Picking up from slide 26.
Okay.
26. Good morning. My name is Jack Archer. I'm a policy analyst with the State Board of Education. And in this next segment, I'd like to begin by highlighting the statutory role that the State Board of Education has been assigned by the legislature in the accountability work we're discussing this morning in the webinar. And there are really two pieces of legislation that are most important here. And they're House Bill 2261, passed in 2009, and Senate Bill 6696 that followed in 2010. 2261 was the landmark Basic Education Act passed in 2009 that redefined basic education and created a new funding structure for it. While often overlooked in all the attention to funding structure, 2261 included an entire part entitled Shared Accountability for School and District Improvement. And the first thing that 2261 did in that part of the Act relating to the State Board was it directed the State Board to create an index that would complement the federal accountability system or replace it altogether. It said that the State Board should build on the work it had already started in developing criteria to identify schools that are successful, those schools that are in need of assistance, and those schools where students persistently fail, as well as to identify a range of intervention strategies. And second, Senate Bill 16696. This was the Omnibus Act on School Accountability. And 6696 had specific direction to the State Board of Education on how the system would be put together. First, it directed SBE to use an accountability index to recognize schools that had closed the achievement gaps, and second, to use that index to identify schools that are in need of improvement, including, as Ben mentioned, non-title schools. It said in that act as well that performance of schools and students will be measured through the index using multiple outcomes and indicators, and those would include, but not be limited to, graduation rates and the results of statewide assessments. Second, it required SBE to create a required action process for persistently low achieving schools. Ben has touched on that and will be discussed further as we go along. And last, it required SBE to develop an accountability framework. It said that SBE should continue to develop a framework that creates a unified system for challenged schools, increases the level of support to schools based on the magnitude of need, and uses data for decisions. And this takes us right back to the Achievement Index again.
Okay, this is Sarah Rich again. We actually created this slide because we just want to be very clear and echo what Andy said about our vision being about all students having access to excellence in education. And the State Board feels an urgent need to move forward now to strengthen a system of continuous improvement. And we really want to keep the focus on preparing students for what comes after they exit the K-12 system. So whether that is gainful employment, citizenship, and post-secondary education, all of which are mentioned in state law as the goal of our education system. So the very next slide, this is really dovetailing on what Jack was just discussing, which is that we have multiple opportunities here. Andy referred to it as a
serendipitous
sweet spot. I like that.
I think you coined the phrase. Yeah,
I think you did. I wrote it down.
That is a bumper sticker.
So this is our serendipitous sweet spot. Back in 2009, the legislature used this language about potentially replacing the federal accountability system with our index. That effort was made, but the opportunity didn't exist at that point at the federal level. So our goal here is to create an aligned and coherent state system. And that would fulfill those legislative expectations and continue to improve the existing index. The third opportunity here is we now have student growth data. We'll have student growth data available for reading and math, and that will be, there was a question earlier about, are we looking at the same kids over time? That is our opportunity to look at those same kids over time and see if they're growing quickly enough to get to grade level within 3 years or by their final year in school. So it's not enough to just know that kids are growing. If it takes them longer than they have, that's not fast enough. So it'll be a look at student growth there and add that new dimension to our evaluation of school performance. And then finally, this is another a fresh opportunity to focus on achievement and opportunity gaps in new ways. We'll have the ability to look not only at proficiency gaps, but also we'll be able to look at growth gaps. So in July, the State Board of Education approved a resolution, and among other things, it contained these 4 big ideas to guide the revision of the index. One is to make sure that our new revised index is well aligned with the goals of the system, which we've already discussed, preparing students for what comes after high school. That we would incorporate student growth data, that's both a federal requirement and a serendipitous sweet spot opportunity, and it's a much more equitable way to evaluate school and district performance. Thirdly, the new index will disaggregate by subgroups, which is necessary to make sure that opportunity and achievement gaps and growth gaps are not hidden. And we intend the index to be a helpful tool for educators, parents, and community members to both do some self-reflection and make plans for internal improvement, and to provide an external accountability system. So this next slide is a look at our current index, which we thought would be helpful. Many of you may already be familiar with it. It's been produced for about the past 4 years. It's been received very well by districts and schools. And the explicit intent in the ESEA flexibility application was to use this as the starting point, I guess I should say, for the revision. And the idea was building upon the success of the existing index. It was created as a deliberate counterpoint to the AYP system. So I'm going to point out a couple of things here. Unlike AYP, which is reading, math, graduation rates, and unexcused absences, this is looking at all of the assessments for which we collect state-level data. So reading, writing, math, and science. The idea here is we really do want to prepare kids for their future lives, and science and writing are critical. And it takes all of those measurements and breaks them out into 4 different performance indicators. So we've already talked about the idea of performance indicators here. You see these in rows. So there's a row for non-low-income students and a row for low-income students. The idea being here that we wanted to very, very visually display that gap. This is based on the percent of students who are proficient and advanced. There's a little box in the upper right-hand corner here that says tier and index range. So this gets to the that policy judgment that I mentioned. So the judgment was that from a 5.5 to a 7, for example, that was an exemplary performance by a school. So that is that deep blue color that you see represented here. The third row is achievement versus peers. This is a statistical calculation that's intended to put a school's performance in the context of their own demographics, so that schools with a high degree of challenge are compared to schools with a high degree of challenge. So a 4 means the school is performing about as well as other similar schools. Above a 4 means they're outperforming their peers. Below a 4 is underperforming their peers. And then this last indicator is improvement from the previous year. We did not have growth when the index was first created, so this was the best way to get at that building level improvement over time. It looks back at the previous year, and it uses a learning index calculation that recognizes not just the percent of kids who are proficient or advanced, but it actually looks at the percentage of students scoring in a level 4 versus a level 3, and scoring in a level 2 versus a level 1. And for those of you who've looked at student data for a long, long time in Washington know that's not a new calculation. And in fact, it exists on the K-12 report card. You can look at the learning index calculation over time for any school. The second block here is the achievement gap block. It was added a few years ago. It was our best effort at the time to try to measure achievement gaps in a value-added way. So adequate yearly progress measures already disaggregated by every subgroup. And this matrix employs a super subgroup concept because we looked at how many schools are excluded because their gaps are invisible due to a low number of students in those categories. So given that we had disaggregated data with AYP, we decided to roll it together for the purpose of trying to make as many schools able to look at their own performance gaps, opportunity gaps as possible. I will point out it's just reading and math and graduation rates.